Hare Krishna, my name is Ananga Lata Devi Dasi, and I am an initiated disciple in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. I have the great privilege and honor of being a direct disciple of one of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's disciples. It is by her grace that I'm able to be at this point in my journey to even feel a smidgen qualified to talk about this. And so my prayer is that I'm able to imbibe her mood of sensibility and uncompromising purity. In the previous video, I had shared about the circumstances leading up to me taking my spiritual life seriously. That paramount moment, that pinnacle point, that was when I committed to my process towards the initiation vows that Prabhupada set. 6 in number, chanting 16 rounds of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, only honoring Krishna Prasadam, refraining from meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex. I'm whipping through these kind of quickly because my beautiful God family, we already made a series called Purify My Life. It can be found at purifymylife.com, which goes into much greater depth of all of these aspects of devotional life. I'm going to invite you all there because I'm leading to a different nuance of this conversation than breaking down the basics. What is interesting about these initiation vows or these tenets for protecting our spiritual life is that 4 out of the 6 of them are directed purely on the tongue. Chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, only eating Krishna Prasadam, which connects with not meat eating, and no intoxication. In the Nectar of Instruction, which is available at purelyprabhupada.com, the very first text, Rupa Goswami is writing about the qualities of someone who is qualified to make disciples. Part of that list is one who has controlled the tongue, stomach, and genitals. In the purport, in the commentary that Prabhupada is writing, he says that one can observe that these organs, these senses are in a line, the tongue, the stomach, and the genitals, and one, by controlling the tongue, can then control the subsequent pieces, which is fascinating. Just the other day I was on a walk and I live near a couple who also practices Krishna consciousness, and they have a baby. They recently gave birth to a child, and we crossed paths on the road and we're chatting, and they're talking about how their child was having some difficulty with breastfeeding and was getting support from like a therapist, like an occupational therapist, to help the child with being able to properly breastfeed. And it was so interesting. I was like, how fascinating. You can do this sort of form of therapy with a baby. When they're born, they can't even really see properly, and they can't even hold their head up, but the mouth, but the tongue, they're able to have this sort of capability over, in order to suck their mother's breast. And it's just so characteristic of how strong this sense is for the human being. These traditions, are oral traditions passed down, verbally, and it was heard. And even the 9 processes of devotional service are Shravanam Kirtanam. So hearing, shravanam, and kirtanam, chanting or speaking, all centralized around the tongue of speaking. And so how I usually describe these points are how you can look at different species of life and sort of see what their expert capability is. And so with the human form of life, our intellect and our communication is superior. The human form of life is that species where we inquire and we observe the world around us and we contemplate, why am I here? Why am I suffering? Who am I? What happens after death? This is the form for that. And so the number one foundational point for all spiritual seekers is: you are not this body. I am not this body. We are not these bodies. Many ways that I like to go about the discussion of the difference between the body and the self. And I have in an article on my website a summary of a story that I want to share because I feel it's most effective for the matters that we're talking about today. From my website, www.floweringvineoftruth.com. It's written in my article entitled Insanity. And so I'm going to just read from it. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupāda, the founder and Acharya, preeminent teacher of the international Hare Krishna movement, tells a story of a well-to-do man with questionable character who fell in love with a young and spiritually wise woman. He saw the woman and expressed his desire to have her company. In response to his advance, she told him to return in 7 days. After the agreed-upon time, the man returned to see an ugly and frail woman. He asked her about the beautiful lady he had spoken with just 7 days ago. This pitiable woman before him insisted that she was her. Unbeknownst to him, she had spent those 7 days taking strong doses of laxatives and purgatives. She told him that she separated the ingredients of her beauty and stored them in pots. She also told him that he could enjoy those juices of beauty. When the man asked to see them, she directed him to where she had stored the stool and vomit, which were emanating an abominable smell. At this time, by the grace of the saintly girl, the man was able to understand the difference between the body and the soul, as well as of which is superior and desirable. I love it! It's so good! So, I brought that up because I think it's a beautiful description of one way that we can start to conceptualize the distinction between the self and the body. As unsavory as it sounds, this is the reality. I am not this body. This is why it's so important to have a period of time for celibate student life to really deeply understand these truths. Prabhupada describes this as the science of self-realization. And as with any science, there's empirical experimentation, investigation. As fellow scientists, philosophers, human beings in this classroom of life, I invite you to test my hypothesis. I ran my experiment. Replicate my study. Come to your own conclusions. Share with me your results. If you made it this far to the end, I deeply, deeply thank you. Deeply thank you from my heart to yours. Hare Krishna. Anangalata, you're telling me that this body is just a bag of flesh and bones and undesirable human liquids. Like, gosh, how? But you were talking about healing and trauma and coming, out of that. Like, how do those things coincide? I feel so dirty and shameful in my bag of flesh and bones. Well. There. There.